This is your Friday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Hope everyone's having a good day out there. Hope everyone's had a good week as well. Getting ready for the weekend. Some good football watching. AFC, NFC title games. Bengals against the Chiefs in the AFC. And, of course, over in the NFC, the 49ers at the Rams. Two interesting games. And I'll have Mark Craig on in a little bit to talk about both of those games and to talk about a little bit more of the Vikings and their ongoing search now for a head coach and his first impressions of new general manager Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. Introductory news conference was Thursday. You can hear myself, Ben Gessling, and Andrew Kramer talk a lot more about that on the Access Vikings podcast. That went up sometime Thursday, late afternoonish. So check that out if you haven't listened to that already. A lot of talk about the new general manager and what direction they might go. Mark and I talked about that some as well, so that will be coming up here in just a little bit. Saw an interesting, is maybe the polite way of putting it, trade idea involving the Vikings and the Packers potentially this offseason, involving a quarterback. I'm not going to spoil what it is. I'm going to bring that up a little bit later, but suffice to say, I don't think it will wind up happening. But first, what did I miss? A lot of losses in basketball, predictable in nature on Thursday night. Gophers men's basketball team loses to Ohio State. Again, the depth in their front court, just too much to overcome. We knew that was going to be a problem going into this season. They've been able to battle through it in some cases, but could not against Ohio State. They lose that game at Williams Arena. Final score was 75-64 in that one. Gopher women's basketball team also a losing effort on Thursday. They lose their fourth in a row, 80-66 at Purdue. The team is struggling right now. I thought this was going to be a better season for Lindsay Whalen's team. And again, we've talked about this a few times. They've got a lot of those recruits coming in next season, kind of hanging a lot of hope on that recruiting class. And, you know, rightfully so. But I did think this program would be better off this year. So a disappointing season for them, and a disappointing result in an 80-66 loss at Purdue on Thursday. Finally, Wolves lose at Golden State. You know, no shame in that. Golden State, one of the best teams in the league again this season. 124-115 was the final. Wolves fall down to 500 again. Their record back down there now after they had climbed above that mark for a single game at least. And that game brings me to kind of a bigger point and a question from super rookie Tim Hayes, who longtime Randball readers and podcast listeners might not know this, but he was the very first, basically the very first commenter in Randball blog history. And again, that's an interesting, maybe strange distinction that nobody else would really think about that. But that blog now is more than 15 years old. And Super Rookie follows me on Twitter still and says, he writes in and says, first time, longest time. How much credit should we be prepared to give Gersson Rosas for the most exciting Wolves team in years? And it's good timing because I've been thinking about that a little bit, and the good timing too when they play Golden State for a couple of reasons. The biggest one being probably the biggest trade Rosas made, certainly the biggest trade he made during his tenure before he was fired a few months ago, right before the season started, was that swap a couple of years ago now, where he sent out Andrew Wiggins and what became a top, lottery pick to Golden State for D'Angelo Russell. And, whenever these teams play each other, it seems like there's this kind of like, how is Wiggins going to do? How is Russell going to do? There's this natural comparison that happens, which isn't really fair. It's a small sample size kind of thing. Russell gets the better sometimes. Wiggins gets the better sometimes. But notable Thursday because not just because these two teams played, but Andrew Wiggins named an All-Star on Thursday. And again, that's a bit of a popularity contest. I think Andrew Wiggins is having a nice season, certainly not an all-star season, but good for him. Congrats to Andrew Wiggins on that. D'Angelo Russell not an all-star this season. So Wiggins has that going for him, winning that part of the trade. So the Rosas ledger has some positives, has some negatives. Certainly, I think that trade had to be made. We were clamoring for it at the time. It ended up being pretty costly, and then now Wiggins has played better with the Warriors. D'Angelo Russell certainly when healthy, and again, he left yesterday's game with an injury, so that part of it too is an interesting side note to all of this. Didn't look to be too serious, but we'll find out more about that. I would be surprised if he was available for tonight's game against Phoenix, but we will see. But anyway, the Rosas ledger, positives and minuses, strikes and gutters, right? There's a lot of things to kind of watch on either side of it, but the Golden State piece is only one piece of it. He's by and large has done a good job building this roster. This is pretty much Rosas' team. They have not done a whole lot personnel-wise since the start of the season. They had a few 10-day contracts, things like that, but mostly this is the team that he built that is now 24-24 in good position to be, at the very least, a play-in team in the Western Conference and positioned pretty well to be in, if not in that top 6, to be ultimately in the top 8 once the play-in is settled. So let's kind of go through the team he has built more or less. Now, he, of course, inherited Karl-Anthony Towns. Josh Okogie was here already. That was it, though. There are a lot of trades, a lot of roster maneuvering since then. He was responsible for drafting Anthony Edwards, which certainly looks like a good idea at this point. Well, you can argue that LaMelo Ball also would have been a fine choice, but the upside of Anthony Edwards is very, very strong. Made some pretty shrewd moves around the edges to kind of fill out this roster. I think Naz Reid, I think we would all agree that was a pretty savvy, pickup as an undrafted free agent. He's become at least a good fringe rotation player, sometimes more than that when given extended minutes. Jalen Noel, a second-round pick a few years back, certainly looks like he has a bright future in the league. They missed on Jarrett Culver, but besides that, the draft has been pretty good. Jaden McDaniels, that was another good pick. So you're looking at, some things here that have gone pretty well for Rosas. And you even bring in Patrick Beverley this season. He's done a lot of different things, before he was jettisoned. And how do we evaluate his tenure as a whole? Probably needs another year or two, and there might be some moves in between made by Sachin Gupta. We'll see what happens here at the trade deadline as that comes up here pretty quick. But for now, the team that Rosas has built, I would say, is pretty good. He probably deserves a decent amount of credit for what the Wolves are this season. He's obviously not around for that for various reasons, but if we're just looking on balance at the team he has built, he definitely should be getting some of that credit, Super Rookie. You're right about that.
Take a playcation to Mystic Lake for 24/7 gaming, fun restaurants and bars, and luxurious hotel rooms. And join Club M to bask in the rewards. Follow the lights to Mystic Lake, where every day is play day.
All right, Mark Craig joins Daily Delivery right now, of course, covers the NFL and the Vikings for the Star Tribune. Mark, it's a conference title game weekend. Some interesting matchups, a couple teams that were, pretty low seeds getting all the way to the title game. We're talking about the Bengals and the 49ers, maybe not teams that we would have expected to get this far, but both of them have a shot, and we'll talk about that in a minute. First, I want to pick your brain a little bit on the new Vikings general manager. We heard from Kwesi Adofo-Mensah on Thursday morning, and a lot to like with his introductory news conference. Obviously, his tenure will be defined over what happens in the next, several weeks, months, years. Initial impressions, though, Mark, of what you heard and saw from him.
Well, I mean, it's I was talking to some people in Cleveland that I know, and he said, he's a guy who may not be ready for this, but he's going to blow you away when you talk to him. And I think he's his intelligence, his ability to communicate, all that stuff, which is very important in that job, is getting the consensus on everything. is boy, he's hard to not like. I mean, he's impressive, but again, this is just an interview. It's just the first press conference. He's got to prove himself. In other words, what I'm saying is that, and to me, what's fascinating about this hire and the fact that Ryan Poles was hired in Chicago on the day that he was going to interview here, I'm really intrigued to see how this plays out because they're both young, smart, they're both brilliant, they're up and comers in this league, but they're different. One guy was raised, he came out of he played football in college, undrafted, had a chance with the Bears, and then he started his career with, the way you do whenever you're going to be a football executive. The other guy played basketball and was on Wall Street, and it's a completely different vibe. So I'm really interested to see how the two of them go forward. It's going to be fascinating to watch. But this guy is going to be he's going to be well liked, and I think that whoever he surrounds himself with, is going to be the communication at the TCO will be, pretty clear because I get a really good feeling about this guy. His humility, his intelligence, his ability to communicate with people is very impressive.
We've seen hires like this more frequently, in the last 5-10 years in baseball and the NBA, where, you're pulling people from, MBA economics backgrounds, these really smart people, Ivy League educated, people who are just good at making decisions in general, good at analyzing data. I think it's no surprise that those two sports have been more at the forefront of that because they were more at this forefront of using analytics, using, data to kind of figure out what's the best way to do things. How do you think that applies to a football model? Is football a different sport? Are there particular challenges in approach, someone coming from that background versus a football background?
Well, I mean, every time I have a conversation about quote unquote analytics with people, I come away having more questions than whatever they were telling me about. And obviously it seems like it plays better with baseball because you have a larger sample size. With football, these guys literally, there's only 17 times a year now, a regular season, that these guys play this way. I mean, they practice differently. Preseason games are different. It's such a small sample size. And I always come away thinking, if there's some sort of analytics out there for fourth and 1 at the 50, like we saw with the Buffalo Bills on that opening drive. Now, 4th and 1 at the 50 on an opening drive for the Buffalo Bills, when your quarterback is 12 feet tall and 400 pounds and can just roll out and get it and will his way to a first down, or with Baltimore with Lamar Jackson, if it's 4th and 2 from my 4-yard line, I might go for it, because it's a different person. I don't know how analytics, I don't know how the say the Vikings look at the analytics and do the same thing that maybe the Buffalo Bills do or the Baltimore Ravens do. So I'm sure it's geared to each team. But the way he described it today was it goes along, obviously, the football talent evaluators. It's looking at the simple things as opposed to maybe the complex level football type stuff. So if he marries it that way, that's great. The one thing about consensus, though, there will always be inevitably I don't care what coach he picks. The coach he picks will be an analytics guy, 100% on board. But at some point, there will be decisions that have to be made by this guy. Can he make those decisions? We'll see. He doesn't have a lot of experience, so it's going to be fascinating to watch it play out. But this whole, everybody says the consensus, and they always say that at the beginning, but there will be times where a decision will have to be made that other people will disagree with, and he has to make that call.
That's a good point. One final thought on the Vikings before we turn to title game weekend. And obviously with this hire made, a lot of eyes turn to not only decisions, Adofo-Mensah will have to make, in part on the roster, but also the head coach now becomes the head coach search accelerates now that they have the GM in place, because that person inevitably was going to have a say in that. You just referenced that you thought the new coach will have an analytics bent to him. I would agree with that. Knowing what we know now about who they hired at GM, do you have any better guess at any names that they've already interviewed or anybody else out there that could be a top candidate for this job?
Well, I think we need to look at that defensive coordinator in Philadelphia, Jonathan Gannon. From what I've heard, he's the type of guy that would fit with this general manager. It will be a modern analytics guy, probably a younger guy. As I was joking, someone with Cleveland said they were trying to, whenever I was trying to like piece together, who is this guy? And they said, well, let's put it this way. This guy won't hire a Mike Zimmer. And so, yeah, I mean, the former way that it was done, they had their chance. They had their windows of opportunity. It didn't work. It was an old school football GM with a football coach father hiring a coach with a football coach father. That's done. And now you're going to see a different way of doing it. And the old way didn't work. So let's see if the new way works. But I would say that Gannon, is the guy to look at. He was well liked. I mean, I know that there's some coaches on staff that love the guy. I think he was well respected in the building. I don't remember a whole lot about the guy. He was assistant defensive backs coach, but people are saying that that's the guys to look at. Now, I also have a question. When you hire your GM and you've already done 8 interviews, and I understand Quinn is going to go back to the Cowboys, and I think Hackett got hired in Denver, so you're down to 6. I mean, the GM should have the ability to say, "Hey, I want to interview some other people." No matter how long if it takes another week, he should be able to hire the guy that he wants, because that is the only way it's going to work. If he does not approve of the 6 guys that are left on that list, and they try to say, "Hey, we're going to hire one of these 6," strike 1.5, strike 2, because it's got to be, for this to work, it's got to be his guy. That if they trust him enough with the GM job, they got to trust him enough to pick the head coach. I
agree with that. It'll be interesting to see too what decision-making tools he uses and others on the staff use to evaluate Kirk Cousins. We've talked about that being such a big off-season question, a fresh set of eyes on that, and that will be interesting as we get into February and March. But before we get to February and March, let's talk about the end of January, because there's 2 pretty good games coming up this weekend. Kansas City against Cincinnati and San Francisco against the Rams. The Rams have a chance to host the Super Bowl. I don't think they would have imagined they were going to host the NFC title game after the way the seeds shook out, but then you lose Green Bay, you lose some of the other top teams, and all of a sudden it's, these 2 teams that have faced each other twice, and San Francisco has gotten the better of the Rams, even though the Rams have a better record, and you like them to do it again. Something about this matchup seems to favor San Francisco.
Yeah, this goes against my, when you're due to lose in the NFL, things kind of flip-flop. The 49ers have beaten them 6 straight times. The 49ers blew them out in San Francisco earlier this year, like week, I want to say 10. And then they beat them in overtime at SoFi Stadium on week 18. I like the 49ers just because they're a team that what they do well. I mean, the quarterback is I don't want to say he's a liability, but he's the face of that franchise right now is the all-pro receiver who's the best running back in football right now. They're tough. Zimmer said they held on every play. To me, it was like they just kicked butt on every play. They're a physical team that can travel. They're confident. They're healthy enough. There's pressure on both sides, but the Rams have really stepped up to this, and Matthew Stafford has stepped up to this immense pressure where winning the Super Bowl is the only goal that matters. Anything else is a failure. So I like the 49ers, like their toughness. I like the fact that they have the confidence. They've beaten this team 6 straight times. Now, in saying that, the Rams are due. That defense, when you've got Aaron Donald and Von Miller playing the way they are now, and Leonard Floyd, I mean, he's like the forgotten one, but he's still outstanding. But I do like the 49ers. Who knows? Maybe it'll be 49ers and Cincinnati. They'll do it for a 3rd time in the Super Bowl.
That's right. That was a throwback to, they met a couple times in the 80s, right? Or was it early 80s?
Yeah, Super Bowl 16 and 22, I believe.
So like early 80s and late 80s.
81 and 88. Yeah. I mean, the one in 81, I think is still, for whatever reason, is still like the highest rated Super Bowl, I believe. think I saw that somewhere.
It was Joe Montana against Kenny Anderson. Is that who it would have been back then?
Yeah, Kenny Anderson and Boomer Esiason in Montana. So,
well, it's possible. It's just interesting how one team can have such a hold on another when both are so good. It's just kind of goes to show matchups. And, these are, again, two of the coaches that kind of are of the, new modern NFL mold. I don't think, Kyle Shanahan doesn't necessarily, he still likes to run the ball and pound the ball, but these are two relatively young coaches kind of that vein of, this is the trend in the league right now is younger coaches.
Yeah. And I also believe that, even though the Rams, Stafford and the Cup and the passing game is important. I think one of the reasons that they did lose those games is I think they only averaged like 50 yards rushing in those two games. With that pass rush, they need to run the ball a little better. They don't need to be, Mike Zimmer. You don't have to be the 72 Dolphins, but you need to have something to slow down the Bosas of the world and that pass rush. And to me, they got to have a little bit of a running game, and they're great at yards after the catch. So maybe a shorter passing game, which I think the Packers kind of got away with and was probably responsible for Rodgers being so pressured. They got to do that a little bit. And McVay is the modern guy, but he knows the value of what, to running the ball a little bit does for you.
You mentioned pass rush. We'll shift to the AFC. Joe Burrow is sacked, I believe, 9 times in the divisional round, and yet they still found a way to win. I mean, that was a pretty tough performance by him to manage to, keep getting up, keep delivering those passes. Pretty impressive and a great quarterback matchup. Again, I don't know if we can get much better than Mahomes against Allen proved to be last week, but Mahomes against Burrow is pretty good going in this one too.
Yeah, I mean, the Chiefs are like 11-1 in their last 12 games, but the one loss, it was a shootout with the Bengals in Cincinnati. And in that game, it was like the Chiefs in the first half were leading like 28-17. I think like 5 different Chiefs had plays of 25 yards or more. Second half, the Cincinnati's defense is so underrated. They didn't, after halftime, they didn't have any more big plays. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ball, the Chiefs played their worst defensive game in the last 12, 14 weeks. They went back to how they used to play defense before. And Jamar Chase gets 11 catches, 266 yards, 3 touchdowns. I mean, I each step of the way, I've not believed in the Bengals, and I don't believe in them this week because I just like, the Chiefs are playing the home conference championship game at home straight year. They're going to be at Arrowhead in their element, comfortable, and I like them to win this game. But man, I think Terry Bradshaw said it on a post game or so, or on the other channel, talking about the AFC, and was saying that this guy is Joe Namath. He's like, and it's, the people, I don't remember Joe in Super Bowl III, but I remember that era and a little bit later in his career, I was growing up. And yeah, it's everything about this guy. I mean, people say he might be too cocky. No, give me him over more of the vanilla guys that are afraid to say anything or I mean, I just love this guy, the way he conducts himself and the way he leads that team. And another way you get away with 9 sacks is you got a kicker, or one of the best kickers to come into the league ever. And like all those sacks that he took seemed like they were 12, 15, 16-yard losses. There was a sack before the half that, where they say, can't take a sack there because it puts you out of field goal range. Well, the 12-yard sack, and the Money Mac walks in and kicks a 54-yarder right down the middle. So, but yeah, he can't keep taking 9 sacks, and hopefully Cincinnati gets their offensive line together next year. Because you don't want this guy to get hurt again. I mean, he is, along with a lot of those AFC guys, this is the guy. The future's in the league is in the hands of these guys, and man, he is fun to watch. Great accuracy on the deep ball. Just he's gritty, but he's fun to watch as well.
He is. It should be a good weekend of football. It's going to be hard to top last weekend, but we'll We'll try, and it's just amazing, dude, to think about that LSU team that had Justin Jefferson, Joe Burrow, and Jamar Chase on it. Now that we know what all three of those guys are doing in the NFL.
Yeah, I'm sure Justin's sitting here. Well, he's probably not in Minneapolis now. If he's smart and has enough money to be somewhere else. But yeah, he's probably saying, "Give me that quarterback." No offense to Kirk, but yeah, that would be a fun quarterback to be in lockstep with.
Indeed. Well, Mark, enjoy the games. We'll not do this next weekend because there will be no games, but we'll reconvene for the Super Bowl, whichever teams make it. In the meantime, enjoy the weekend of football and the coaching search.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
Good stuff from Mark Craig, as always. We'll take a break, like I said, from having Mark on next week because there will be no football. After we got off the recording, he joked, "No Pro Bowl preview?" No, Mark, no Pro Bowl preview. We don't care about the Pro Bowl pretty much anywhere, and certainly not on Daily Delivery. Let us finish with the cooler today. Just notice this on ESPN.com, kind of going through some options for Green Bay and Tampa Bay if for some reason both those teams need to move on from their veteran quarterbacks. We're talking about Aaron Rodgers potentially getting traded. We're talking about, Tom Brady. What if he retires? At the very end of the piece, they've gone through a whole bunch of options that as far as what Green Bay might do. They're talking about Kirk Cousins. It's, speaking of deals a team might not want to make, we don't typically see teams trade quarterbacks within their division, with a few exceptions. I'm talking about the Eagles traded Donovan McNabb to Washington in 2010. The Packers aren't trading Aaron Rodgers to the Vikings, but if they ship Rodgers elsewhere, would the Vikings consider trading them Cousins? Goes on to say, in a vacuum, I don't think there's any question the Packers would want Cousins. LaFleur was his quarterback's coach in Washington when they took him in the 4th round. LaFleur has described him as elite, and the Vikings run a version of the offense that Cousins has done well with. So going on to say, maybe the Packers would be interested for a price. Man, I'm just trying to wrap my head around just the possibility of that, and just knowing Vikings history, I can imagine what would happen in that case is Cousins would go to Green Bay, and then they would win a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins as the quarterback. I can't imagine that would happen. That said, if they were desperate enough to get off of his contract, like, I'm just squinting into the future and just trying to imagine this. It's just an amazing what if. I think there's like a 0.01% chance that would ever happen, but it is fascinating to think about as Cousins, like, as a bridge quarterback. Can't really think Green Bay would do that. Would they even have the cap space? But a fun one to think about nonetheless. Vikings fans have thought for years about what if Aaron Rodgers comes here at the end of his career like Brett Favre did. What if Kirk Cousins goes to Green Bay is not a thought I have ever had, but thanks to ESPN.com, it is now wormed inside of my brain. That will do it for today. Thanks for joining me here on Friday. Thanks for joining me here all week. Good stuff coming up next week. Hope you'll be back with me, including a special delivery next week to commemorate the 1-year anniversary of this podcast on Tuesday. Have a great weekend. Be back at it Monday.